The following is presented by King County's Eco-Consumer Program. For tips on ways to become more environmentally aware or to request a green speaker for your group, visit kcecoconsumer.com. Thanks.
Hi, and welcome to BrainWorks. My name's Eric Chudler. I'm a scientist here at the University of Washington in Seattle. Because I study the nervous system, I'm a neuroscientist. Today, we're going to talk about the most important part of your body, the brain. This 3-pound mass of tissue in your head does everything that's important for you. It controls your emotions, it helps you think, it helps you feel. You can say, the brain is you. Today, I've invited a few of my friends to help us learn about the brain.
My name's Kelly. Hey, I'm Will.
Hello, my name's Lindley.
What's up? I'm Sam.
Hi, I'm Lainey.
Throughout history, the brain has been compared to many different things. For example, a book, a CD, a radio, a camera, a computer. And those items do have some similarities to the brain, but there are also a lot of differences. For example, a computer can process information. So can your brain. But a computer doesn't know that it's actually here. It has no consciousness. You know you're here. You're conscious of where you are and what you're doing. Your brain does some of the most important jobs of your entire body. Some of the things you have to think about, like planning, problem solving, moving. Your brain also does some things that you don't have to think about, like sleeping or controlling how you breathe and your heart rate. Let's go into the lab and see how some of those things are measured. Here we are at the University of Washington Department of Anesthesiology Patient Simulator Center. The Simulator Center is a place where young doctors learn how to use medicines to help people drift off to sleep before surgery. Come on, let's see how they're doing.
You are ready to operate. We're learning about the brain and what the brain does. And one of the specialties of medicine that really is concerned about how the brain's working is the anesthesiologist, because we want to make sure that you don't remember what's going on in surgery. How can we tell that Chris might be awake?
Well, he's blinking.
He's blinking. Isn't that totally weird? He is. It's kind of spooky, isn't it? How else might we know that somebody's awake?
They're breathing.
They're breathing. Here, let's right there and right there. Can you hear him breathing? Isn't that very weird? If you listen real carefully, what else can you hear?
You can hear his heart beating.
You can hear his heart beating, right? And that's something else that the brain does. It controls your heart rate. And if we look on this monitor back here, you can see an electric picture of his heart beating, and this is how fast it's beating. How fast is his heart beating right now? 74 beats a minute. Yeah, 73. It varies a little bit, so does your heart. How else can we? So he breathes, lungs control, the brain controls that. His heartbeat. What else does the brain do?
It helps you move.
It helps you move. That's what else the brain does. And we can put a special monitor on the patient to make sure they can move or can't move during surgery, because some surgery we don't want them to move, and we can stimulate nerves in their body to see if the brain is making their hands move or not.
So, Chris, do you have any problems with your lungs?
No, not really.
Okay.
That's good.
Good. Any wheezing or asthma, anything like that?
No.
Good. What else do we have to worry about?
Heartbeat.
Heartbeat and blood pressure. Ask him if he has any problem with his heart.
You have any problems with your heart?
No, I'm a pretty healthy guy.
Pretty healthy guy. Your blood pressure been okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to get ready to put Christoph to sleep, okay?
Chris, I'm going to put a mask on your face.
All right.
Okay. And he's just going to start breathing some oxygen in and out. His brain is making him breathe, and oxygen's going in, carbon dioxide's coming out, and we're going to let him breathe a little bit to fill his lungs up with oxygen so that when we put that breathing tube in, it won't matter that he's not breathing for a few minutes. Sam, you're going to give him these medications to put Chris to sleep. And when you inject it into here, it goes into his arm, to his heart, to his brain, and it's going to put his brain to sleep. His eyes will go closed, his reflexes will stop, and he'll stop breathing. And then you're going to give him a second medication called succinylcholine, and that's going to paralyze him so he won't wiggle during the case, okay? And we're going to give him one more medication before we get started, and it's going to make him forget everything. So while he's breathing oxygen, you've got the tube all ready to go, you're thinking about where you got to put that breathing tube in, you're going to give him some of this Versed. So I'm going to have your assistant hold those two. Now that we have the fluid running so that we'll carry the medication to his arm, you're going to turn that back, and you're going to inject 2 cc's of medicine from the 5 to the 4 to the 3. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing all right.
He's not talking so well because you gave him some stuff to have him start forgetting and getting relaxed. Now we're ready to put him off to sleep. You ready? Okay, here we go. You're going to turn back here and make sure that his heart's beating okay, his blood pressure's beating okay, and this number right here says that his lungs have just about 100% oxygen in them. Now you're going to tip that back, and you're going to give him 15 cc's of propofol rather quickly. Chris, you're going to get very relaxed and sleepy. How will you know that Chris is asleep?
His eyes will probably close.
His eyes will probably close. Let's see if they did. Look at that. Hold the mask. And what else has happened?
Did he stop breathing?
He stopped breathing, exactly. So now we have to breathe for him. So I'm just going to have you hold that mask really tight, and I'm going to reach behind you and turn this. Now I want you to squeeze that bag once in a while for him to keep him breathing, okay? See that? See his chest going up and down? So we've got him off to sleep, and the surgery should be starting. Anybody have any questions? Yeah.
I noticed that the heart rate the blood pressure.
His heart rate went down just a little bit, and his blood pressure went down just a little bit? Exactly. The medications that Sam gave him alter his brain, and their heart rate and blood pressure come down just a little bit because the brain's been put to sleep. As they wake up, their heart rate will come back up, and their blood pressure will come back up also.
When somebody falls asleep just regularly, does their heart rate and blood pressure go down at all? Or?
Their heart rate will go down a little bit, but their blood pressure won't.
Okay.
Yeah. We've turned off the anesthetic, so he's going to start waking back up. The medicines that Sam gave him are also going away because the liver's been eating him up. And his brain's going to start waking up, and pretty quick it's going to be able to start letting his muscles work again. Why don't you turn on that twitch monitor and see if he's able to move his muscles. And look at that, he is, okay? He's starting to breathe. His heart rate's going to go up a little bit, and his blood pressure now is going back up to where it was. Let's see if we can wake him up, shall we?
Yeah.
And if we can wake him up, we can take that breathing tube out, but he still won't remember anything because of the medication Sam gave him.
So how are you feeling, Chris?
I feel a little sleepy.
Yeah.
He's sleepy. He will feel a little sleepy for about another 30 minutes. Any other questions about what we did? Understand how the brain was altered by medications and how nature brought it back after the medications were gone.
So what's a brain made up of? Well, the brain's about 80% water, 10% fat, and 10% carbohydrate, protein, and salts. But putting them all together really doesn't make a brain, does it? No. When you're born, the brain has already built itself with billions of neurons. Neurons are also called nerve cells. And they're really special because nerve cells generate a little bit of electricity, just like a battery. In fact, in your 3-pound brain, you've got 100 billion neurons and a lot more support cells. In fact, it would take you 3,000 years to count all those 100 billion neurons if you counted them at 1 per second. That's a long time. Let's look at a nerve cell and how it sends signals. Neurons have 4 special parts. They have dendrites that are waiting to receive messages from other cells. They send the information to the part of the neuron called the cell body, also called the soma. From the soma, information goes down an axon. At the axon sometimes branches. And at the end of the axon is something called the presynaptic terminal, also called the axon terminal. The interesting thing about neurons, though, is that they don't actually touch. If you look at our next slide here, you'll see that we have 2 neurons there. But at the end of one neuron, where the axon terminal is, it doesn't touch the dendrite of the next cell. So how can signals get from one cell to the other if they don't actually touch? Lainey?
Could it be electricity?
Electricity is a good answer. Remember, neurons are like little batteries in that they generate a little bit of electricity. And that electricity does go down the axon, but it doesn't jump across to the next cell. So how else could information get from one cell to the other if they don't actually touch?
Chemical signals?
Chemical signals, that's right. What happens is that electrical signal, also called the action potential, goes to the end of the axon, and at the terminal, it causes chemicals to come out. And when those chemicals come across to the next side, they cause the dendrite to receive them, which then causes another electrical signal. So inside of a cell, a neuron uses electricity, but between cells, it uses chemical signals. So let's make a neuron and see how it works. Lainey, Lindley, Sam, why don't you be dendrites? Kelly, you be an axon terminal, and Will, you be a dendrite of another cell. So what we've got here are actually 3 cells. I'm going to be the axon terminal of neuron number 1. Lainey, Lindley, and Sam are dendrites of neuron number 2 with their cell body, their axon terminal, and inside the axon terminal are neurotransmitters. Will is going to be the dendrite of neuron number 3. So the way it's going to work is because I'm neuron number 1, I'm the axon terminal, I'm going to be throwing my chemicals across a space. You guys have got to catch these and bind those to your dendrites. That will cause an electrical signal to go through the dendrites to the cell body. The cell body will then generate an electrical signal that will travel very quickly down the axon to the axon terminal. Once this electrical signal gets to the axon terminal, it will cause an explosion of chemical signals to be released, and Will, our dendrite of neuron number 3, has got to catch as many as possible. So let's see if it works. Here come chemical signals floating across that small space. They've caught them. They send electrical signals to the cell body. The cell body then generates an electrical signal, which is going to go down the axon. Will, get ready for the chemical signals. Great. And he bound those chemical signals, which will then cause an electrical signal in that neuron to go down to the soma, the cell body, then to the axon, and continue the message along. So that's how your brain works. That's how neurons work, with chemical signals between neurons and an electrical signal inside of a neuron. We're here at the University of Washington EEG clinic to record some electrical activity of the brain. Remember, neurons are like little batteries. They generate a little bit of electricity. Using an EEG machine, we're going to record some of that electrical activity. Come on, let's see how they're doing.
Okay, what we're going to do today with Will is do an EEG recording, and that's a recording of his brain waves. And brain waves are electricity that are generated by the brain itself. And we're going to put electrodes on his head and record his EEG. And in order to do that, what we do first is we measure his head and make marks on his head, and that tells us exactly where to put the electrodes. So next what we're going to be doing is putting the electrodes on. And we're going to be recording his brain waves through hair, skin, bone. So there's a lot of stuff between the outside of his head and his brain. So what we're going to be doing first is we're going to rub a salt gel, and a salt is a conductor of electricity. We're going to start putting the electrodes on Will now, and you can see on this box right here, this is like a visual of his head. This is his nose right here, and here's the back of his head. His ears would be right here. Where I'm putting the electrodes now is called over the occipital lobe. Do you know what the occipital lobe's job is? Vision. You can see Will in the picture right there, okay? And you can see his EEG and EMG. Do you know what EMG is? Electromyogram. So we're getting a lot of activity from his muscles. And I want you to just close your eyes and hold really, really still, Will. You ever heard the term alpha? It's a normal activity that you see in people usually over the age of like babies, okay? And that's seen in the electrodes that are O1 and O2. And so what we're looking at here is his alpha activity that you see from the back of the head right there. Go ahead and open your eyes, Will. Now the alpha goes away. Open your eyes again, Will. And look at these big waves right there. Where are those coming from? What is the electrodes that you see right there?
The FP1
Okay.
and FP2.
Those are the ones that we put right in the middle of his forehead, okay? So when he's moving his eyes around, that's what you're seeing. You're not seeing his brain waves, okay? So basically this is what we do is we record the EEG and we record it for a while. And remember when you asked earlier how long an EEG took? The reason we record it that long is we want a nice time sample of a person's life, because a lot of people, particularly those who have seizures, they might not have an abnormality on their EEG every single second, but the likelihood of your seeing it increases more the longer you run the recording, okay?
Well, what would the EEG look like if someone was sleeping?
During sleep, we see way more activity around the vertex right here. And it's actually because we're looking at activity that's deeper within the brain. And the reason we want people to go to sleep is sometimes then it will bring out seizure activity, you know, or something that looks like they might have epilepsy when they're asleep that we are not seeing when they're awake. So that's why we like to see it both ways.
And what will it look like if someone had a seizure?
I have a sample of a patient right here. This is a patient who is not having a seizure right here. Now notice the two sides. This is very similar to what we were doing on Will, whereas the top of the screen here is the right side of the brain, and this is the left side of the brain. Do any of you notice a difference?
Well, this side has more waves.
These are actually called spike and slow waves because they look like a spike and then a slow wave afterwards. But this is, they're not having a seizure right now. Their EEG is just showing that abnormality. But this is what it looks like when they have a seizure. You can tell the difference between those two, okay? What happens is the electricity in the brain just sort of goes wild, if you will. So you have like this real buildup of electrical activity. And so what happens is it looks like this, okay? And that's why when people have a seizure, when they've got this going on, that's why they might not be able to talk to you, or they can't hear you. So do you want to do something what we call an activating procedure?
Sure.
Okay. And I'll show you what. So this is a strobe light we're going to flash at you, okay? Okay, close your eyes. Now left click on it. Right here, the line on the bottom is showing us the light flashes. Now left click on it again. And open your eyes, Will. What did you see?
Just like red flashes.
Is it kind of like a kaleidoscope?
Yeah.
Do you know why it does that?
No.
It's actually, you're seeing those colors when the light goes off. And the faster the light is, the more flashes of color you see.
There's like swirly colors.
Vibrating.
Red and black.
Will, what have you learned here today about why we do EEGs?
Like how seizures affect people.
Right, so the EEG is the best test still to show function of the brain. And so you can't see on an MRI seizures unless it's being caused by a tumor or a brain malformation or something like that. But you can see on an EEG the evidence of seizures. So it's a very useful tool in helping doctors know what kind of seizures a patient is having and therefore how to better treat them.
So your brain weighs about 3 pounds, has 100 billion neurons in it. It sends thousands, millions, billions of electrical and chemical signals every day. But your brain isn't a bowl of jello. Different parts of the brain have different densities of cells. Some parts of the brain have connections from place to place. Let's look to see what a real brain looks like. I've invited Dr. Kathleen Mulligan to talk to us a little bit about what the brain does and the different parts of the brain. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, Eric. Well, I brought some brains from our teaching collection for you to see. These are real human brains that have been preserved in chemicals because the brain is made up of cells, and if we didn't preserve them, it would smell even worse than it does with the chemicals, right? So here's an intact human brain. Can anyone tell me how they think it came out of the skull? Which would be the front?
That part.
That's right. And so this is the back. This is all of the frontal lobe of the brain. What do you think happens there? Do you remember?
The thinking.
Yeah, that's for thinking and calculation. It's also the place where personality appears to be part of the function.
Is that also learning, or is that all over?
Pretty much all over.
Yeah.
A lot of functions are really distributed across the whole brain.
Okay.
So if we move further back from the frontal lobe, then we hit the parietal lobe. Does anybody know how the lobes are named or why they're named the way they're named? Like the frontal and the parietal and the occipital lobes?
Location, kind of?
Yeah, they're actually named for the bones of the skull that overlie them. And I've got a skull here to show you where the brain sits. So the brain has come out of that tiny little space there. And the reason that we have all of these wrinkles is because the cortex, this wrinkly part, is a big sheet of cells that we have to fold up to fit in the small area of the skull. Okay, so we've got frontal lobe, parietal lobe, and then at the back, does anybody know what that one's called? It's called the
lobe.
back lobe. That's a good try. It's the occipital lobe. Does anybody know what happens back there? What part of
Sight.
sight? Yeah, so that's the part of the brain that processes visual information and helps you to see. If we turn the brain over, we can see the other important lobe of the brain. That's this little knobby bit here. That's the temporal lobe. That's the part that sits under your temporal bone or just under your temple. That has some parts of it that are important in learning and memory, the hippocampus and the amygdala, and some emotional and memory functions. You might notice that the brain really is in two hemispheres, and those two hemispheres are connected by a big bunch of fibres, which if we just gently ease this brain apart, you can see down there. Can you see that big bunch of fibres there? Mm-hmm. So one side of the brain connects very strongly with the other side of the brain through those axons, which are called the corpus callosum. If we take a knife and cut right down the midline between the two hemispheres, we get something that looks like this. So that's the medial view of the brain, and you can see this part here, that's that corpus callosum. So that's how one side of the brain communicates with the other side of the brain. Anybody know what these funny little hollow tubes are? Yeah.
Are they blood vessels?
That's right. The brain is just like any other part of your body. It needs to get blood to supply the nutrients and oxygen that the cells need. So we have a lot of blood vessels that are still intact on some of these brains. Okay, I've got one other thing to show you here. Okay, what do you think that is?
It covers the brain?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's just the right shape to cover the brain, isn't it?
Like a hat.
You're a skull cap, yeah. This is actually one of the protective membranes that sits over the brain inside the skull. So this is called the dura mater, and that means hard mother, tough mother. You want to feel how tough it is? It's like canvas. You know? It's really hard to break.
Easily.
Exactly. So that's one of the membranes. There are another two membranes over the brain that are much more delicate. But this dura then covers all of the brain and all of the spinal cord, and then the skull is an extra layer of protection over the brain. When we turn the brain over to the inferior surface, you can see this funny little thing down here with all the little mini wrinkles in it. What do you think that is?
Is that like the cerebellum?
Yeah, that's the cerebellum, which means little brain. And that's the part of the brain that's important for, yeah? Balance and coordination, right? So that's the part that helps you walk on a nice straight line and balance and coordinate when you're playing sports. There's a little nubbin of tissue coming down here that's been cut, and that's the brain stem. And that's the connection between the brain and the spinal cord. I think we have a better view on this brain here. So you can see the little cut surface there. So when we take the brain out of the skull, we actually have to sever the connection between the brain stem and the spinal cord. And the spinal cord we've got here. Looks like that.
Is that how long it actually is?
Yeah, yeah. So this cut was probably taken around about the middle of somebody's neck, and the solid part of the spinal cord ends in the small of your back, and then all of these little stringy things here are the nerves that are connecting down to go to your legs. So the spinal cord is the connection between your body and your brain. The signals coming in, sensory signals coming in and going up to your brain, and motor signals coming from your brain running down here through the nerves to activate your muscles.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah. Is there a difference between a male or a female brain?
Well, just by looking at the brains, you can't tell the difference between male and female brains.
It's true, but male brains do weigh about 10% more than female brains. But that doesn't mean anything about how smart someone is. So, Kate, thank you very much for giving us this great tour of the brain.
You're welcome.
Juggling, that's my brain in action. My brain helped me catch things, my brain helped me see. My brain also is responsible for my personality, and it has all of my memories. It also is responsible for everything that I learn. I hope that you've learned something on this show about the brain, about the different parts of the brain, about how neurons work and how they send messages. A great way for you to learn more about how the brain works is to build models of neurons and brains. There's some great ways to find out about how to build models on the Neuroscience for Kids website. And back here, the kids are building some of these models. Lindley and Sam, what are you guys working on?
We're making neurons.
I see. I see on this one here that you've got some good dendrites here, the cell body, the axon, and the axon terminal. Remember, the dendrites are waiting to receive messages from other cells. They send that signal to the cell body. A signal then goes down the axon to the axon terminal. And in the axon terminal are those chemicals called neurotransmitters. That's great. Keep on working. I'd like to see some more of those. And Kelly, what are you working on?
I'm making a neuron out of string.
I see.
See?
Yeah, I see it. I can see the dendrites here.
Right.
They go to a cell body, the axon here, and then the axon terminal there.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thanks.
And Will, what are you working on?
I'm doing the same thing as Sam and Lindley, except for I'm making a neuron out of beads. And I have the dendrites here, the cell body, and I'm just finishing up the axon.
I see. And on this one, looks like one that you've already made. This pink bead at the end here, that's supposed to be the axon terminal, is that right?
And I have.
I see, you're just finishing that one up. Great job. These are some great neurons here. And what are you working on, Lainey?
I'm making a brain made out of clay.
And I see you've got the lobes of the brain there. Can you point out any of them?
Yeah, here's the frontal lobe.
Right, and the frontal lobe is very important for personality and also memory.
Uh-huh.
I see you've got the parietal lobe here that gets information from the senses, for example, touch and pain.
Yeah.
And I see the occipital lobe there. That's very important for vision. And the temporal lobe, that's important for learning and memory.
Uh-huh.
And in black there, is that the cerebellum?
Yep.
Yep. And what's that in green?
This is the brain stem.
And the brainstem is real important for keeping your heart going and also helps you with breathing. Well, I have a little surprise for you guys. Remember I told you before that the brain was not a bowl of Jell-O? Well, last night I made a brain of Jell-O, peach Jell-O. Does anybody want a piece?
Yeah.